Hi, I'm Chris Bober, and welcome back to the Bober Academy Football Podcast. This, of course, is brought to you by the Bober Academy, where our mission is to train and develop superior linemen to dominate on the gridiron. Now, if you are listening to this in a podcast, be sure to subscribe to our podcast. That way, it's at the top of your list, and you get notified of all the new episodes that we do. We do a lot of fun stuff. If you're watching this on YouTube, click the little button down at the bottom to subscribe to our page, and also the notification bell so you are notified. And then, of course, if you're watching this anywhere on social media, we'd love to hear your comments. Please follow our pages, retweet, like, all that stuff we do on social media. Help us get the message out about offensive line play. So we are continuing our Building a Lineman series. I know it's kind of long this off season, but we're getting closer and closer to football season. You know, we started off in January with the feet being connected to the ground and the knees and the hips and the core and back. And we're working our way up the body to the shoulders. So we are joined by Nolan Claussen. Nolan's a movement specialist at Midwest Movement in Elkhorn, located right there in the heart of Elkhorn. And their theory is, or their mission, that what they like to say, their motto is, if it hurts, we can help. So Nolan, welcome to the podcast. So today we're going to talk about shoulders, and shoulders are such a big deal for offensive linemen. And the way I like to say it is, you know, as offensive linemen, our weapons are in our hand and shoulders, right? Sometimes the head's involved a little bit, but connecting that shoulder, that extremity of the arm to the body is so important. And tell us a little bit about kind of how the shoulders work. I think we have a misconception of shoulders a lot out there, right? I do know shoulders are very, very important. Tell us how they work and how they're applied to football.
All right. So just start off, quick anatomy. Basically, the shoulder is one of the most unique joints in our body because, like your legs and everything, is connected to the actual part of your body. Whereas in the shoulder, you have one little bony attachment, and it's this little AC joint right here. And you hear a lot of players that blow that AC joint, right? Kind of a mark amongst my friends is yours raised up? If it doesn't raise up, you never hit anybody hard enough, kind of a thing.
I've heard my AC joint, I know.
Yep. So I would guess that a large majority of the players out there have separated their AC joint at one point, right? And that's just because it is a very, very small bone-on-bone attachment that's supposed to attach this big weapon that we use in the football game to the rest of our body. But what is really unique about it is you can kind of see, I got drawn up right here. This shoulder blade is attached to the rest of our body, or the ribs, and it floats over that rib cage. But it's attached by a ton of different muscles that keep that shoulder in place so that we're able to move, give and blow forces, absorb forces, things like that. And so if it's all musculature, we have to make sure that those muscles are, one, strong enough, two, that they're coordinating well with each other, and they're doing the right thing. So we always kind of use the analogy that our shoulders, most people's shoulders that are injured are like cannons, a cannon shooting out of a canoe, right? So if you shoot a cannon out of a canoe, it's going to create a lot of ripples in the water. It's not going to be very effective. The force of blowing that cannonball forward is going to be absorbed by the canoe going backwards quite often. So what we kind of talk about is we want to build aircraft carriers for that shoulder blade so that that cannon can fire off, not create any ripples in the water, and be the most effective that it needs to be. Very common injuries that we see, other than the AC joint, is rotator cuff tears and labrum tears, right? And so one of the common things that you see in rehab setting is everybody doing their band exercises, getting their rotator cuff muscles warmed up. I see it in the weight room all the time. I see it post-op. I see it all the time. They're sitting here just doing these band exercises. Well, if we know what those rotator cuff muscles do, we probably wouldn't want to train them like that, right? So the rotator cuff muscles, and I think everybody can see this fairly well. Basically, we have muscles. There's 4 muscles that attach to make this shoulder joint stable. There's 2 in the back and 2 in the front. Those are your rotator cuff muscles, and they are there just to support this glenohumeral joint, the actual shoulder joint, and make that socket deep so that it can move and do all these things but not pop out of place. Right?
Those aren't your your pec or your shoulder, like the big muscles. Are they? They're underneath. They're really small, right?
Yep. And their sole job is just to make sure. I have this golf ball drawn on a tee, right? Their sole job is just to make sure that that golf ball does not fall off the tee. Okay. And so when people train those shoulder muscles to do motion, right?
Structure.
Yeah, they're not really doing the function of those muscles. So one thing is, like, you can ditch those exercises unless you're in a post-surgical or rehab case. Like, they're not great exercises for the shoulder joint. So one of the best exercises for those shoulder muscles, or those rotator cuff muscles, are farmer's carries, hanging from a bar, things like that, because they're doing their job and making sure that that socket is very, very stable. But so before we can get to training or rehabbing this shoulder joint, we have to make sure that this scapula is adhered to our rib cage very, very, very well. We got to make sure that it is that aircraft carrier, right? So we got to make sure all these muscles that take the shoulder blade and attach it to our rib cage and our spine and like that they are working really, really well. So one way that you can tell if somebody has maybe dysfunction of that shoulder blade is that they get on all fours and they rock back and forth, and they'll start to see that winging of the scapula. I can't really do it. I do a lot of exercises trying to prevent that. But I see it very often in the high school student, quite often in volleyball players and things like that, overhead activities. But it is common in football players because we tend to get maybe a little loose in the weight room with the correct position before we do like a bench or a curl or like all these beauty making exercises, right? So one of the things I like to tell people is make sure those shoulders are set. Basically, roll those shoulders back and down, and then do your exercises, right? So these muscles here, kind of like those muscles in the glenohumeral joint or the actual shoulder joint, their job is to hold everything in place. So if we're doing a lot of, say we're doing bicep curls and we're like kind of swinging, the shoulders are all over the place, or we're doing bench press and we're like rounding the back and doing all these crazy motions, basically we're just training those muscles to not do what they're supposed to do. So get those shoulders rolled down and away and start getting them to adhere to the rib cage.
So what do you think? You're taught you want to have a big bench press, right? I mean, that's what they measure. And I feel like all my life training and what I see kids doing these days, and even in bodybuilders and stuff, is they're doing so much with their chest, but that seems to me like it's kind of pulling up and away. If your stability is what you want your shoulder joint to have, what's the ratio? You mean should you do like twice as many back exercises as chest exercises?
Yeah, exactly. So when we have athletes, I always suggest a 2-to-1 ratio of pulling exercises versus pushing exercises. And that even comes into vertical pushing or horizontal pushing, right? So we want twice as many vertical pulls and horizontal pulls as we have vertical pushes or horizontal pushes, right? Kind of like you said, everybody has been focused on the bench press. Like in the combine, they do the 225 max rep thing. And I know this doesn't really pertain too much to the offensive line, but Christian McCaffrey kind of just like burst everybody's bubble on all these metrics in the combine when he was going through it, right? His 225 was, I want to say like 8 or 9 reps or something like that. I can't remember, but he was like one of the lowest running backs out there. And everybody's like, oh, this guy he's going to be terrible. Well, I mean, he kind of disproves that, right? And one of it came out later, his trainer was talking about like the bench press doesn't matter in his specific skill set, right? Yes, he has to block and do all these things, but if he has strong shoulders and a strong back, like it doesn't really matter how much force he needs to go here, right? Mm-hmm. And when we talk about like a combine rep scheme with 225, right? Like when on the football field are you doing that slow like that? Everything is violent, right? And it's 1 reps, right? It's not like, yes, in the pass block, you're doing multiple, but it's not 25 reps of that, right?
Yeah. I think it's interesting because, in fact, when you bench press, you have your elbows out and you're pressing like this, and right. That's actually the weakest position. So when I look at shoulders for linemen, I feel like shoulders are used obviously to press and strike, but also for stability. So many times you're not as much punching as you're like placing your hands very heavily, right. And you're kind of trying to hold them here. And I teach my guys to keep their elbows attached to their rib cage because that's the strongest place. If you put your arm out, your arm out here and you push, you're not very strong. If you push it in here and they try to move, then you're super solid. But how can linemen train to be both strong and stable? What are some things that they can do as they prepare for that? And then in addition to that, is it worth training with some width in your elbows and stuff, so in case you do get in those vulnerable positions? What do you recommend for linemen?
So there's a huge emphasis on bar movements because that's what they do in the combine. I'm a huge proponent of single arm or single leg exercises, right? So there's a lot of times where you're going to just be out here with one arm pushing, right? If we're connected to a bar, like that strength doesn't really matter. There's often never times where both of our hands are hitting simultaneously where they're creating that pressure. Yes, sometimes in blocking, but more than likely it's here, then wrap, or like on a pulling block or something like that, right? Or striking with one hand. So if we can do like single dumbbell exercises, right? So try this next time you guys are at the gym, anybody out there, if you just do one dumbbell and you're not holding the other, you're just doing one, I guarantee you're going to have more of a core workout than you are going to have a pec workout. So doing that, like we're integrating the core and getting that training a little bit better, right? So 1, drop the bar, switch to dumbbell, kettlebell, things like that, where we have to just use one arm. And then there's a stability component with that, right? Nice. So with the bar, it's stable because you got 2 hands. There's a lot more stability in it. With one kettlebell or a dumbbell, you have to control that thing the whole way. There's a lot of work that is going on when you're controlling it. So it kind of talks about what we were talking about here. We're training that shoulder joint and those rotator cuff muscles to stay stable while we're doing that exercise.
Well, and even if you do have to test with a bar, if you're doing it one-handed, the bar should be no problem. Like that's building a base to make your straight bar bench even more strong than it would be if you didn't train that core. You'll probably get farther faster, but it's just not a good practice to be in there because that's just not a very realistic situation.
Yep. And we talked about this when we talked about leg stuff. And basically they did that study where they took a group of athletes where they just did bar squats. And then the other group of athletes did like single leg stuff. And after an 8-week period, the group that did single leg had bigger strength gains than the group that just did the bar work, right? So it's that stability component. You give somebody more stability, they're going to be stronger, right? So I do really try to throw out bar work with a lot of my athletes. Now, granted, I'm not taking out like hang cleans and things like that because some of those movements are really important to some of these programs. And so they gotta learn how to do it. They shouldn't touch it the first time when they're in college or something like that. Another exercise that I love to do. So what we're going to do is basically we're going to start working those shoulder blade muscles. So we're going to get a band, and I got this fancy band that's got 2 loops, but you can take another band and just have 1 loop, or you could take a band and just go right here and just collapse it with your
any kind of band to hold between your hands.
Yep. And anyways, what we're going to do is you're going to get your elbows up against that wall, and you're going to push your spine away, almost like you're rounding your back, pushing your heart away. Then you're going to walk one by one, just going up until you feel like you can't go anymore. I can tell you right now I have a lot of pressure in my back, and then you walk right back down, keeping this band stretched apart. And if I can tell you that will kill you, if you do 5 or 6 walk-ups, your all back here is just going to be on fire. And I love getting those muscles fatigued before we do a workout. And I say fatigue because I think a lot of people stop too soon in their warm-ups and are not warmed up enough. Another exercise, this is going to be a little more difficult. Hopefully I can get this to stay back there. But basically, you get the point. If you have a band or something attached to something above your head, and then you're going to do what we call face pulls.
Yeah, we just call them face pulls. This to get your like kind of upper back and neck, and keeping your elbows up and just pulling it like this.
Yep.
You can even do this on a cable, right?
Yep. And so you kind of did it, and I did it when I was just watching myself do that. When we do any of this stuff, and we'll talk about neck, I think at some point.
Oh yeah, that'll be right before the season.
We want to make sure that we don't do this, right? We want to keep that head in a stable position and pull back. Okay. Yep. And so that goes with anything, and we'll talk about this later, but make sure your head's in a good position. And I'm sure you'll talk about that with linemen too, right? Yeah. So get in those good training habits. But those 2 exercises, I believe, are crucial and very, very good, effective ways of getting that shoulder primed and ready for everything that we do.
So it's interesting. We're talking about shoulders, and if someone would have said we're going to talk about shoulders today, they would think, okay, we're going to show us all kind of like shoulder lifts and presses and stuff to do. But everything we've talking about is like the stability part of our shoulders, like, creating that scapula stability in the back and the front, and those small muscles that support your shoulders. So your recommendation is to do those first, independently lifted weights or bands to create that stability. But is there, once you kind of get that base and you get that warm up, what kind of shoulder exercise do you like to do if they want to, like, lift some weights and stuff like that?
So those band exercises for weights, but like when we're doing shoulder exercises, again, single arm, single leg stuff. So doing a half kneeling. So you're kneeling on one knee, and that same knee that you're kneeling on, you're going to do presses up and keep everything close to the body. Train it right?
Yep.
And if you do it with one, you're going to have enough stability right here that you have to control it. Even if you get in bad positions out on the football field, your body is going to be like, nope, pull that back in. If you train those good positions, it'll help tremendously. The other thing is, I see a lot of people doing these shoulder exercises. They're really, really good bodybuilding shoulder
arm lifts. All you're doing is lifting your arm up straight, either in front of you or on the side. Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of those, especially in athletes. They look good. They make your shoulders look really, really good. But if you're going to do those, get light weights and just have a lot of control with that, right? Let's not just fly up. I see a lot of people like doing exercises like this. If you walk into a gym, you're going to see some gym bro lifting up on his toes, trying to get that arm up there. There's no point in really doing those.
Is there anything to like, I remember we used to lift with the Giants. We had this circuit we did, and some of them were to actually do pull-ups and get our elbows up above our shoulders. And what they kind of found out was by doing that, you're actually putting yourself in more of a dangerous position. We had some guys with shoulder injuries. So would you say it's like common to say that you really don't want to put weight or a ton of stress putting your elbow anything above your shoulder?
Right. So those are upright rows. Yeah. They found out that upright rows are more detrimental than they are good. Right. Just like you said, kind of like what we were talking about, like there is just one little bony spot right here. We put the most stress right there. Right. And like, how often do we do this in a football game, right? It's very, very rare. It's more here. And if anything, it's just here. It's not lifting like this.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't see like maybe some people like giving a forearm shiver, but it's just like a repetitive motion that might have less returns on investment.
That's what it showed. We had a bunch of guys with shoulder injuries, and we stopped that. So one last question before we kind of wrap it up here is, what about flexibility in your shoulders? Is there a benefit to stretching your shoulders, and how would you properly do that?
Yes. So with any joint in our body, or our body in general, I am a huge fan of mobility over flexibility, right? So whether your joint can move in a desired range of motion versus whether your muscle can stretch there, right? Our joints tell our muscles what to do, right? And if our joints aren't moving correctly, then it's going to tell our muscles to tighten down and things like that. So I call these controlled articular rotations, and I'm going to tilt the camera down just a little bit. So one thing that we can do is we're going to create a fist with our non-working hand. We're going to put that right by our side. We're going to try to quiet all the other joints in our body other than the working joint, right? So what we're going to do, we call these controlled articular rotations. You're going to bring your arm up. And once you get to the very, very top, so you can see my hand, I'm going to take that and I'm going to rotate it as far as I can one way and bring it straight back. Try to reach as far back as I can.
Wow, that's impressive.
And come back. And then we're going to go back and reverse it. And so basically what we're doing is just, I always say we're trying to create a salad bowl range of motion versus a shot glass range of motion. So like if you had a stick in a shot glass, it only can move this far. Because if you have a salad bowl, you got all this range of motion. And really what we're doing when we do those exercises is we're just telling our brain, hey, I want to move in this range of motion, and you're not letting me right now. But if I stay consistent with moving through that range of motion, your brain will eventually say, all right, you've pushed me enough. I'll start opening up that range of motion enough so that you can move into it.
Nice. That's good stuff. So, to recap, we talked about the strength in our shoulders still comes. I mean, it's like football, right? You build from the inside out. You go from the center all the way to the sidelines and front and back of the line of scrimmage. Your body's the same way, right? So everything comes from the strength, the stability comes from your inner core, your spine, that area, and you want to build that bridge all the way out to, and the farther it gets away, the more important the stability is. So we talked about shoulders, and we talked a lot about the muscles that support the shoulder, and not trying to really retch on them and flex them out as far as getting flexibility, but to just try to gradually increase range of motion. And for you guys listening out there with your coaches or linemen, another bunch of information supporting that you need to stay tight. I see so many guys that just want to have their hands wide, and that you're just so vulnerable to injuries out there, and you're just not very strong. That's bad things happen when your hands get way outside. So Nolan, thank you so much. I know we can probably talk about this for days, but you give us some great stuff. So thank you so much for coming on. Anyone's out there listening, you can find our stuff on anywhere you find podcasts. Be sure to subscribe. If you're watching this video, subscribe to our channel, like, share, retweet, all the stuff you do on social media. And if you have any sort of pain when you're moving, call Nolan at Midwest Movement out there in Elkhorn. I'll include the link in the captions wherever you're finding this. And Nolan loves to help athletes. He's a college athlete himself, and he likes to get people back on the field. And we sure do appreciate it, Nolan. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. And hopefully we people out there listening and watching will learn a lot. And if they do have any hiccups, they're going to come see you.
Awesome. I love it. Appreciate it, Chris.
All right, guys. Thanks again for listening and for watching, and stay tuned as we continue to provide information and how to build alignment and how to train and develop superior alignment to dominate on the gridiron at the Bober Academy. So we will see you guys next time.